This is the unknown zone, where truth hides in the ashes of war, where science and secrecy became weapons, and knowledge itself could destroy the world. By 1943, the Second World War had become more than a struggle for land and power. It had become a race to harness the most devastating force ever discovered by mankind, the power of the atom. Both sides, the Allies and the Axis, were searching for it. But in the shadows of occupied Europe, one question haunted the Allied command more than any other. Was Nazi Germany building the atomic bomb? To understand the fear that gripped the Allies, we must return to the beginning, to the scientists who had unlocked the atom itself. In 1938, German physicists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann made a discovery that changed history. They found that by bombarding uranium with neutrons, it could be split into smaller elements, releasing an immense amount of energy. They had discovered nuclear fission, the process that would one day power both cities and weapons of unimaginable power. When this discovery reached the scientific world, one of their colleagues, Lise Meitner, an Austrian Jewish physicist who had fled Germany, immediately understood what it meant. She realized that this process could release enough energy to create a bomb, one so powerful that it could annihilate entire cities. Word of fission spread quickly, and as Europe descended into war, the question was no longer whether it was possible, but who would build it first. When the war began in 1939, Germany was ahead in almost every area of physics. Its universities had been home to giants of science, Planck, Heisenberg, and Einstein. But under Hitler, the scientific community fractured. Jewish scientists were expelled or fled, and the regime's obsession with racial ideology undermined its intellectual strength. Still, the possibility remained that the Reich's remaining scientists, under the physicist Werner Heisenberg, could unlock the secrets of the atom and hand Hitler a weapon that would change the course of the war. In Britain and America, that fear took hold at the highest levels. Albert Einstein himself wrote to President Roosevelt, warning that Germany could be developing a bomb based on nuclear fission. That letter led directly to the creation of the Manhattan Project, the Allied program to build the atomic bomb before the Nazis did. But the Allies didn't know how far Germany had progressed. Rumors spread through the intelligence community that uranium was being mined in Czechoslovakia, that experiments were being conducted in Berlin and Leipzig, and that Heisenberg had assembled a team of brilliant physicists working in secrecy. The threat was terrifying. If Hitler had the bomb, he could erase London, Moscow, or New York with a single strike. So the Allies decided to find out, and if the Nazis were close, they would stop them by any means necessary. In late 1943, the mission was given a name, Operation Alsos. It came from the Greek word alsos, meaning grove, a subtle nod to General Leslie Groves, the American general overseeing the Manhattan Project. The operation would combine science, espionage, and warfare. Its purpose: to capture German nuclear scientists, seize their laboratories, and gather every scrap of evidence about the Nazi atomic program. But Alsos was more than just a scientific mission. It was also a race against time, not only against Germany, but against the Soviet Union. Because as the Allies advanced into Europe, so did Stalin's army. Whoever reached the German nuclear research first would control the future of atomic power. The operation began quietly. Its first missions were in Italy, where Allied forces had just landed. Rumors had spread that German scientists were working in northern Italy, protected by retreating SS units. Also, teams followed close behind the front lines, interviewing captured German officers, searching laboratories, and gathering documents. At the head of the mission was Colonel Boris Bosch, a former intelligence officer with a sharp mind and little patience for bureaucracy. His scientific advisor was Dr. Samuel Goudsmit, a Dutch-born physicist and one of the leading experts in atomic research. Together, they formed an unlikely partnership. One soldier, one scientist, chasing ghosts across a continent at war. In late 1943, their investigations in Italy produced little more than fragments, letters, half-burned notes, and rumors of uranium shipments heading north. But those fragments were enough to convince them that something bigger was happening inside Germany itself. The real work, they realized, was not in Italy. It was in the heart of the Reich. In early 1944, Allied intelligence intercepted reports of a uranium processing facility in France near the town of Strasbourg. When Allied forces liberated the city later that year, Alsos agents moved in within hours of the last shots being fired. Inside the laboratories of the University of Strasbourg, they found scientific papers, diagrams, and test equipment, all linked to Werner Heisenberg's research group. Among the findings were notes on uranium enrichment and heavy water experiments, clear evidence that the Germans had indeed been working on atomic research. But to the relief of the Allied scientists, the data showed something else. Germany was far behind. They had no functioning reactor, no large-scale uranium enrichment, and no weapon design anywhere near completion. Still, the danger wasn't over. Even if Germany couldn't build a bomb, its scientists and knowledge could still be stolen by the Soviets. And that made Operation Alsos more critical than ever. By late 1944, as Allied forces pushed into Germany, Alsos agents moved closer to their ultimate targets, Heisenberg's team and the uranium stockpiles hidden across the Reich. They knew that when the war ended, the race for the hot atom wouldn't stop. It would only change sides. In the winter of 1944, Boris Bosch's team crossed into Germany under the cover of advancing troops. They followed every lead they could find through burned-out labs, abandoned research centers, and half-empty mines. Every discovery brought them closer to understanding the scale of Nazi ambition and the realization that someone else might reach it first. Because far to the east, Soviet forces were closing in fast, and they too were hunting for the secrets of the atom. By early 1945, the Third Reich was dying. Cities were burning, its armies were broken. But even as the war collapsed, one question still haunted the Allied command. Where was Werner Heisenberg, the man who had once stood at the center of Germany's atomic ambitions? Had vanished. If he was still alive, if his research still existed, it had to be found before the Soviets reached him, because whoever captured Heisenberg would control the future of nuclear science. Heisenberg wasn't just another scientist. He was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist, one of the brightest minds of his generation. In the 1920s, he had helped define quantum mechanics, creating equations that changed our understanding of reality itself. By the time war came, he was already a legend. But under the Nazi regime, science became a weapon. Heisenberg was placed in charge of Germany's uranium club, the program tasked with exploring atomic energy and, if possible, building a bomb. For years, Allied intelligence had followed rumors about his work. Secret laboratories, experimental reactors, and shipments of heavy water from Norway. But the truth had always been buried under propaganda, deception, and fear. Now, with the Reich collapsing, there was a chance to uncover it. And so, Operation Alsos began its most dangerous mission yet, to hunt down the German atomic scientists before they could disappear into Soviet hands. In March 1945, Colonel Boris Bosch and Dr. Samuel Goudsmit received orders to push deeper into Germany. The Allies were advancing from the west, and the Soviet army was closing in from the east. Time was running out. Their intelligence suggested that Heisenberg and his team had relocated to the Black Forest region of southern Germany, near the towns of Haigerloch, Hechingen, and Tailfingen. It was there, according to intercepted communications, that the Germans had established a secret research base, a cluster of small laboratories hidden in mountain valleys. This was no ordinary scientific site. It was the heart of what remained of the Nazi atomic project. On April 22, 1945, as American tanks rolled into Haigerloch, the Alsos team followed close behind. The town was quiet, too quiet. Local residents claimed that scientists had been working in a church cellar nearby. When Bosch and his men entered the building, what they found astonished them. Beneath the floor of an old stone church was a secret underground lab. Inside, they discovered a massive spherical tank filled with heavy water, surrounded by stacks of uranium cubes suspended by wires. It was the remains of a nuclear reactor experiment, the heart of Heisenberg's atomic dream. Scattered around the room were notebooks, equations, and blueprints. On one page, Heisenberg had scribbled formulas calculating neutron reflection. It was brilliant, detailed, but incomplete. He had been trying to build a reactor, not a bomb. The Allies realized in that moment that Germany had been far behind. They had achieved only fragments of what the Manhattan Project had already accomplished. Heisenberg's reactor would never have gone critical. It lacked the uranium, the control systems, and the design precision required. But the discovery also revealed something far more dangerous. The Germans had been close enough to understand the principles. If the war show had lasted another year, the story might have been different. Within days, Alsos agents swept through the region, seizing every document, every piece of equipment, every scientist they could find. Physicists like Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, Kurt Diebner, and Otto Hahn were taken into custody and interrogated. Each claimed ignorance or insisted their work was purely theoretical. But Bosch and Goudsmit weren't convinced. They knew the scientists were hiding something. If not a bomb, then knowledge that could build one. And knowledge was the most valuable weapon of all. The operation now had two objectives: capture Heisenberg and secure the remaining uranium supplies before anyone else did. On May 3, 1945, Allied intelligence intercepted a lead. A German physicist matching Heisenberg's description had been seen traveling by bicycle near the small town of Urfeld, on the edge of Lake Walchensee in Bavaria. It was deep in the Bavarian Alps, territory still crawling with retreating SS units. Colonel Bosch assembled a small strike team and moved in under the cover of night. They approached the town at dawn. Inside a modest house overlooking the lake, they found him, Werner Heisenberg, calm and composed, sitting at his desk surrounded by papers. When questioned, he offered no resistance. Heisenberg spoke politely, even warmly. He told them he had spent the last months trying to keep his research out of Nazi hands. Whether that was true or not, no one could be certain. Pash ordered his immediate arrest. In that quiet lakeside home, one of the greatest minds of the century became a prisoner of war. With Heisenberg in custody, the Allies had achieved one of their primary goals. But the mission wasn't over. Dozens of other scientists and materials were still unaccounted for, scattered across Germany and Austria. The Alsos team moved quickly, locating uranium stockpiles in mines, laboratories, and factories. In one operation, US soldiers uncovered more than 1,200 tons of uranium ore hidden near Stassfurt. It was packed into barrels and shipped to the United States, where it became part of the Manhattan Project's nuclear stockpile. The Nazis' atomic dream had been dismantled piece by piece. But for the men of Operation Alsos, the real victory wasn't in the gold of science they seized. It was in what they prevented. A future where Hitler's Reich might have unleashed the power of the atom upon the world. Yet, even as the mission neared its end, one thought lingered in the minds of the Alsos team. They had stopped Germany, but in doing so, they had opened a door that would never close again. Because now, every nation, every power, knew what was possible. The race for the atomic bomb was over, but the race for nuclear supremacy had just begun. By the spring of 1945, Nazi Germany was collapsing into dust. Its armies were surrendering, its cities were burning. But for the men of Operation Alsos, the war was far from over. In fact, their most important mission had only just begun. With the German atomic scientists captured and their laboratories dismantled, the next objective emerged with urgent clarity: seize the raw materials, the uranium, the heavy water, the research notes, and the prototypes, before anyone else could get them, because knowledge was only half the weapon. The other half was the material that made it possible, and those materials were scattered across a dying empire. When the Alsos teams interrogated Heisenberg and his colleagues, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Germany had not been as close to building an atomic bomb as the Allies once feared, but they had amassed a vast supply of uranium ore, refined metals, heavy water equipment, and scientific instruments. Enough to relaunch a nuclear program in the future. Enough to give any nation who captured it a massive advantage. And as the Western Allies moved eastward, Soviet forces were sweeping in from the opposite direction. The end of the war was transforming into a new competition, a secret race between the victors to control the science of the future. Operation Alsos became the front line of that race. In April 1945, Alsos intelligence identified one of the largest shipments of uranium ever found, barrels stored inside abandoned factories and mines near the town of Stassfurt in central Germany. The site had been protected by German soldiers until only days earlier. When Alsos soldiers arrived, they found it deserted. But the treasure remained. Inside the mine were hundreds of metal drums stacked in long echoing corridors. Each drum was labeled with chemical symbols. Inside lay uranium oxide, the essential raw material for nuclear fuel. In total, the haul weighed more than 4,200 tons, a staggering quantity, enough to influence the balance of nuclear research for a decade. It was the single largest uranium capture in the entire war. Colonel Boris Pash wasted no time. Specialized teams loaded every barrel onto trucks, then onto rail cars, and finally onto ships bound for the United States. What the Nazis had once hoped to use for their own atomic ambitions was now being absorbed into the American nuclear stockpile. Germany's atomic future was being erased and repurposed. But uranium wasn't the only treasure also sought. They also needed to uncover the full extent of the German research network. Ledgers, diagrams, blueprints, and experimental notebooks could offer insights into processes that had taken German scientists years to develop. In university basements, burned-out laboratories, and abandoned industrial buildings, Alsos agents uncovered mountains of documents. Some were incomplete, others were encrypted. Many had been left half-burned in Nazi efforts to hide their failures and their progress alike. But every scrap of information mattered. Secretaries were questioned, technicians were detained. Scientists who had tried to blend into civilian life were tracked down in remote villages. Each one possessed knowledge that could shift the future of global power. Meanwhile, another threat loomed behind the horizon. The Soviet Union, desperate to build its own atomic bomb, had begun launching parallel operations to seize German scientists and materials. Their mission was known as Operation Osoaviakim, an effort that mirrored Alsos in purpose, but not in method. Where the Americans sought to secure documents and volunteers, the Soviets forcibly relocated thousands of scientists, engineers, and technicians to secret research cities deep inside Siberia and the Caucasus. They dismantled entire factories and transported them east. Settlements were emptied overnight, trains carrying equipment, and people vanished behind the Iron Curtain. Stalin's agents were determined not to let the West seize all the intellectual spoils of the Reich. This meant one thing for Operation Alsos. Speed was everything. If a laboratory fell into Soviet hands before the West arrived, the entire balance of nuclear power could shift. The race intensified in southern Germany. As American troops moved into Bavaria and Württemberg, Alsos teams followed directly behind them. Nearly every village, every school, every warehouse had to be searched. Any building big enough to hide experimental equipment became a potential target. One of the most significant discoveries came in Tailfingen, a small German town that had once appeared insignificant. Inside a textile factory, hidden beneath camouflage netting, Alsos agents discovered an advanced physics laboratory. It contained experimental apparatus, technical notes, and correspondence revealing the scale of the German research network. Among the documents was evidence of uranium shipments sent south to Austria, shipments that had never been located. Those crates, believed to contain processed uranium cubes and reactor components, became one of the last great mysteries of the Nazi atomic program. Some believed they were dumped in mountain lakes. Others suspected they were seized by retreating SS units. Their fate has never been fully determined. Another key target for Alsos was the heavy water essential for reactor moderation. Heavy water production had once taken place in Norway, where Allied commandos famously sabotaged the Vemork plant in 1943. But remnants of heavy water equipment remained in Germany: pumps, containment vessels, and storage cylinders. All of it had to be captured. In a factory near Tuttlingen, Alsos teams discovered dismantled components of what appeared to be a reactor moderation system. It wasn't functional, but it proved that Germany had pursued heavy water reactor designs deep into the war. That discovery reaffirmed what Alsos had suspected. The Germans had never stopped trying. Every capture, every document, machine, material, and scientist was immediately catalogued and shipped to Allied intelligence centers. From there, they would be transferred to American laboratories, where scientists working on the Manhattan Project would analyze the information. The harvest was enormous. By the end of April 1945, Operation Alsos had seized thousands of uranium cubes, over a ton of heavy water, more than 1,000 tons of uranium ore, entire libraries of nuclear physics documents, dozens of top German scientists. The Third Reich's nuclear future had been dismantled piece by piece. But what Alsos had not fully realized was that their actions were planting the seeds of a new world, a world where atomic secrets were no longer confined to labs, but woven into geopolitical strategy. The war for the atomic bomb had ended, but the Cold War's atomic rivalry was beginning. And deep within Europe, both the Americans and the Soviets were closing in on the final stage of the operation, the stage that would determine who would inherit the last, most dangerous secrets of Nazi science. As the war in Europe neared its final hour, a single question drove Operation Alsos harder than anything else. Where was the German nuclear reactor? Finding Werner Heisenberg had been a victory. Capturing the uranium stockpiles was another. But until the Allies located the actual reactor, the physical proof of how far the Nazis had progressed, the mission remained unfinished. Because the reactor was not merely a machine, it was the core of the German nuclear project, a symbol of their ambition, and a potential weapon if completed. Somewhere in southern Germany, buried beneath camouflage and secrecy, that reactor waited. But the Soviets were looking for it too, and they were getting closer every day. In early April 1945, Alsos intelligence intercepted a report describing a series of unusual deliveries to the town of Haigerloch: steel tanks, uranium cubes, heavy water, electrical components, and thick concrete shielding plates. The materials were too heavy for ordinary experiments, too specialized for conventional physics. The only conclusion was clear. The reactor had been moved there. Heisenberg's team had built an entire underground laboratory beneath a church in Haigerloch, the same site where Part 2 of the mission had uncovered remnants of the experimental setup. But reports now suggested that the core components of the final reactor had been dismantled and hidden somewhere nearby. If the Allies could find it, they would have absolute proof of the status of the German atomic program. If the Soviets found it first, the balance of the post-war world could shift dramatically. Colonel Boris Pash moved fast. On April 23, 1945, as American forces advanced through the region, Alsos agents descended into Haigerloch once again, this time with detailed intelligence. They searched the church cellar, the underground chamber, and the surrounding tunnels. Among the rubble, they discovered notes describing a device known as B-Fate, the latest design for a German nuclear reactor. It involved a spherical core of uranium cubes suspended in heavy water, surrounded by graphite reflectors and shielded by concrete. The design was sound, but the reactor itself, the physical apparatus, was missing. Someone had moved it. Alsos agents interrogated local workers, laboratory assistants, and remaining personnel. Slowly, a story emerged. In the final weeks of the war, as Allied troops approached, German scientists had panicked. They dismantled the reactor's heavy water tank, removed the uranium cubes, and transported the components under guard to a nearby valley known as Heckingen-Biesingen. From there, the trail went cold. What followed was one of the most frantic intelligence hunts of the entire war. On April 24th, Alsos teams began sweeping through the valley. Every barn, warehouse, and abandoned building was inspected. The search expanded to the surrounding mountains, with soldiers combing through forests and caves. Then came the breakthrough. In a small shed behind a farmhouse near Bissingen, an Alsos operative noticed fresh shovel marks and disturbed soil. The team dug carefully, removing earth until their tools struck metal. Beneath the ground lay a massive steel tank, the central vessel of the experimental reactor. It had been buried hastily, its exterior scratched and dented, but intact. Beside it, hidden under piles of hay, Alsos agents found wooden boxes filled with uranium cubes. They were arranged neatly, as if prepared for immediate transport. Each cube was about 2 inches across, dark, dense, and cold to the touch, the essential fuel of a nuclear reactor. It was the final missing piece. In that moment, the Allies understood the full picture. Germany had never built a functioning reactor, but they had come closer than the world had ever feared. Operation Alsos secured the reactor components within hours. The uranium cubes were packed into crates and guarded by armed escorts. The steel tank was loaded onto a military transport truck and sent to a secure facility for scientific analysis. Everything, every bolt, diagram, and cable was catalogued meticulously. This discovery allowed Allied intelligence to reconstruct the true status of the Nazi nuclear project. Heisenberg's team had conducted sophisticated research, but lacked the resources to scale it into a working reactor. Their design had several fundamental flaws: insufficient purity of graphite, inadequate quantities of heavy water, poor neutron reflection efficiency. Underestimation of uranium requirements. These miscalculations had saved the world, because had Germany mobilized early, and had they not driven out many of their most brilliant scientists through persecution, the story of the war could have been very different. But the recovery of the reactor was only part of the mission. Alsos agents now had to ensure that none of this technology, or the men behind it, could fall into Soviet hands. The Americans arranged for the German atomic scientists, including Heisenberg, Hahn, and Weizsäcker, to be taken to Britain for secure detention. Their location would remain a secret. Their communications would be monitored. Their conversations would be recorded through concealed microphones. This secret detention project became known as Operation Epsilon. Its purpose was simple: to discover what the German scientists truly knew, and to keep that knowledge away from the Soviet Union. The Cold War had not yet begun, but its first battle had already been won. Meanwhile, deep in the forests of central Germany, another critical discovery was underway, one that would shape nuclear history long after Adolf Hitler was gone. American soldiers found a vast scientific compound in a town called Göttingen, once the core of German theoretical physics. Inside were rooms filled with blackboards, equations, and half-completed manuscripts. Many of these documents would later help Allied scientists understand the technical dead ends that had slowed German progress. There was no single catastrophic flaw in the Nazi nuclear program. There were many small ones: misjudgments, shortages, political interference, and decisions made by scientists who were never fully committed to building a bomb for Hitler. The truth was sobering. Germany had the talent. They had the knowledge. They lacked the unity, leadership, and freedom that science demanded. And so, the greatest weapon of the 20th century was built not in Berlin, but in Los Alamos. With the reactor secured, with the scientists captured, with the uranium harvested, Operation Alsos reached its endgame. The mission had revealed the truth behind one of the greatest fears of the war, but its consequences stretched far beyond 1945. The knowledge also seized would become the foundation of post-war nuclear policy. It helped secure America's early lead in atomic research. It prevented Soviet access to critical materials, and it reshaped the world into one dominated by nuclear power and nuclear fear. Operation Alsos had started as a scientific investigation. It ended as the opening move of the atomic age. By May of 1945, Europe had taken its final breath of war. The guns were silent. The flags of the Reich were torn from their poles. Hitler was dead, and the Nazi Empire had crumbled into dust. But from that dust, something new began to rise. A new conflict, born not from territory or ideology, but from knowledge. Operation Alsos had achieved its wartime objective. The German nuclear program was dismantled. Its scientists were captured. Its uranium seized. Its reactor components locked away. Yet the true impact of Alsos was just beginning, because the end of World War II marked the beginning of another, far more silent struggle. A struggle for the future of the atom and for global power, the Cold War. In the weeks after Heisenberg's capture, the German scientists were transported to Britain to a secure country estate called Farm Hall. There, under Operation Epsilon, they were housed in comfort but kept under strict observation. Microphones were hidden behind walls and ceilings. Every word they spoke was recorded. The world would later discover what happened in that house. The casual conversations, the arguments, the admissions, the moments of revelation. When news of Hiroshima reached them, the scientists were stunned. Some refused to believe it at first. Others questioned how the Americans had succeeded where they had failed. Their conversations revealed the truth. Germany had never come close to building a bomb. Not because they lacked intelligence, but because they lacked unity, resources, and clarity of purpose. Their estimates for critical mass were wrong. Their reactor design was incomplete. Their funding was minimal. And many of their brightest minds had been driven into exile by Hitler himself. It was not Allied sabotage that stopped the Nazi atomic bomb. It was the Nazis. Meanwhile, the materials seized by Alsos were transported to the United States, where scientists from the Manhattan Project examined them. The uranium was tested, refined, and eventually added to America's nuclear reserves. The documents provided insight into German research pathways, what had worked, what had failed, and where the Allies now held the advantage. In laboratories across America, this knowledge shaped decisions for decades. It influenced reactor design, nuclear safety protocols, and early Cold War strategy. It helped determine how the atomic age would unfold. The uranium captured from Stassfurt and other sites formed one of the largest early stockpiles of nuclear material in Western hands. It provided a foundation for future research, production, and testing, and just as importantly, it denied those same resources to the Soviet Union. But the Soviets were not idle. Even as Alsos agents swept Germany from the west, Soviet units surged in from the east. Their mission was more forceful, more expansive, and far more secretive. Operation Aviakim, launched in late 1946 but prepared during the war's final months, forcibly relocated thousands of German scientists, engineers, and technicians into the Soviet Union. Entire families were taken. Factories were dismantled and shipped east. Research labs disappeared overnight. Those scientists would become key contributors to the Soviet nuclear program, helping to build the bomb that would one day shake the world in 1949, the Soviet Union's first atomic explosion. The Cold War arms race had begun not in America or Russia, but in Germany, as two former allies scrambled through ruins to seize the future. Operation Alsos ended officially in 1946. Its final report, more than 250 pages long, concluded that Germany had posed no immediate atomic threat. But it also warned that any nation with enough resources could one day harness the power of the atom. It was both a reassurance and a prophecy. Because the world that emerged after World War II was no longer defined by armies marching across borders, but by nations capable of ending the world in an instant. The bomb had changed everything, and Alsos had shown every major power exactly what was at stake. So what was the legacy of Operation Alsos? It was not a dramatic battle. It was not a mission of explosions or gunfire. It was a mission of intelligence, science, and speed. A mission that prevented Nazi Germany from ever standing on the edge of atomic power. A mission that shaped the direction of the Cold War. The men of Alsos fought not for land or flags, but for knowledge. And the consequences of that knowledge defined the next 50 years of human history. Their victory was silent. Their impact was global. And that story is one of the most important, yet least remembered operations of the entire war. This has been the unknown zone, where truth hides in abandoned laboratories, where the silence of war reveals the secrets that shaped our world, and where forgotten missions whisper the beginning of the atomic age. Some battles are fought with bullets, others with equations, blueprints, and the mind. Operation Alsos was one of them. The war for the bomb ended in 1945, but the world it created still lives with us today.